But another objection that people will bring, and I got to hurry, but they say, well, Jesus Christ was not born on December 25th. And they act like this is a revelation. Did you know that Jesus wasn't even born on December 25th? You know, like that's just, oh, wow, you just blew me out of the water. Does anyone here actually think that Jesus was born on December 25th? Does anybody think that we're even using the same calendar that was used back then? Yeah, I mean, the calendar has changed several times since Christ's birth. Okay, even the calendar underwent a major change. I forget, 100 or 200 years ago, there was a major change in the calendar where everybody had to get a new birthday in America because they changed the calendar. Okay, so I don't think anybody really thinks that he was born on December 25th. And when people say to me, well, Jesus wasn't born on December 25th, you know what I always say? I always say, well, you know what? There's a 1 in 365 chance that he was. I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, he might have been born on December 25th as well as any other day. And a lot of times they'll say, well, no, you can prove from the Bible that he was not born. This is what they'll say. I don't know when he was born, but it wasn't December 25th. I'll tell you that much. Go to Luke chapter 1, and I'll show you, where they're coming from on this. Because, I'm showing you their arguments, and you be the judge. You might walk away and say, wow, Jeremiah 10 condemns Christmas trees, and wow, Luke 1 teaches that Jesus wasn't born on December 25th. But form your own conclusion. I'm just showing you the facts here. But look at Luke chapter 1, verse 5. The Bible reads, there was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias of the course of Abiah, and his wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. Okay, so what they'll say is that if we can figure out when John the Baptist was born, we can figure out when Jesus was born. Because, they were about 6 months apart. So if we can figure out when the one was born, that'll help us to know when the other was born. Now, there are so many logical leaps that they take, though, to pinpoint the birth. Because first of all, the first extra biblical teaching that they have to use to support their view of when he was born is in verse 5. It says that Zacharias was of the course of Abiah. And here's what they'll say. Well, Jewish sources can tell us when that course of Abiah was. But nothing in the Bible can. So now we have to go outside the Bible and trust some unbelieving Jew, some Christ-rejecting Jew to tell us when that is. And here's the thing. The Christ-rejecting Jews will tell us 2 different times. Well, it could have been, in the spring, or it could have been in the fall. There's always 2. When you look this up, they give 2 possible times for the course of Abiah. So first of all, it's 2 different times that it could have been. And second of all, you're trusting the Christ-rejecting Jews to basically give you your biblical doctrine on the New Testament. Okay, so that's the first jump that you have to make. But then secondly, even if you can, get the synagogue of Satan to help you figure out when the course of Abiah was, look at verse 23. It says, it came to pass that as soon as the days of his administration were accomplished, because he was of the course of Abiah, right? He departed to his own house. And after those days, his wife Elizabeth conceived and hid herself 5 months. Now look, does that say how long after those days? No. Look, does it say that the day he got home, she got pregnant the same day? It just says after those days, she conceived. So first of all, you have to trust an extra biblical source to tell you when the course of Abiah was. Then you have to just believe, well, we know that obviously the day, when he walked in the door, they just got it done and she just instantly got pregnant. No, it just says after those days she conceived. It doesn't say it happened that day or that week or that month. Okay. It says after those days his wife Elizabeth conceived. And then not only that, but even to just pinpoint that Jesus and John the Baptist were exactly 6 months apart is not accurate. Roughly, but not exactly. Okay, so, just to show you that you can't really pin that down. Now, the other thing is, go back to Genesis chapter 10. Genesis chapter 10, the other thing that people will say about Christmas, they'll say, well, here's where the December 25th really comes from. Because they say, we can prove it wasn't the birth of Christ. Using the shaky method that I just showed you in Luke 1. Okay. But they'll say December 25th is actually the birthday of Nimrod, is what they teach. And here's what they teach. They say Nimrod was a guy who basically, the Tower of Babel was all his idea. And he was basically the mastermind behind the Tower of Babel. and he taught people a pagan worship, and he had a wife named Semiramis, and his wife was actually his mother, who he was incestuously married to, and they produced a child called Tammuz, and Tammuz was supposedly the reincarnation of Nimrod, and he was born on December 25th, and everybody worshipped and all this stuff. Now here's the thing about that. And then here's what they'll say. Here's the proof. The proof is that Nimrod's mentioned in the Bible. Now, let's read everything that the Bible says about Nimrod. We're going to read all of it. It's only 4 verses, so don't worry. Genesis chapter 10 verse 8 says this, "And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod the mighty hunter before the Lord." Now you can see what a wicked and pagan and sinful man this was. Now what does that say about Nimrod, that he was evil, or that he was the mastermind behind the Tower of Babel, or that he was worshipped as a god, or that he married his own mother, or that he produced a child named Tammuz, or that he even had a wife named Semiramis, or that anyone worshipped him? It looks like what was said of him was that Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord. And who's the Lord in all capital letters there? Jehovah. So what were people saying about Nimrod? He's God? He's the sun god? He's reincarnated? He's married to his own mother? No, they said that he was a mighty hunter before Jehovah. So where is this stuff coming from? So let's keep reading. It says, Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. Now, is it bad to be mighty? Is it bad to be a mighty hunter? You're in trouble, Danny. You know, you do so much hunting. You're following the footsteps of Nimrod. You're pagan. But it says next, in verse 10, the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. Out of that land went forth Asher and builded Nineveh, and the seed of Rehoboth and Calah. Now, just at face value, just looking at this, it seems like Nimrod was a mighty man in the earth after the Tower of Babel, because when the Tower of Babel was built, that's where everybody was at. They were all in that one city. They had not dispersed. By the time Nimrod is on the scene, and Nimrod is a king of sorts, he's reigning over, what, 4 different cities? Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh. So he's ruling over multiple cities. So you could say, well, but if he's the king around Babel, the Tower of Babel must have been his idea. And, you know, he married his mom, okay? But what does that say that in the Bible? And it seems that there's, and I'm not saying that Nimrod was a good guy. I'm not saying that we're going to see him in heaven. Although there's really nothing in the Bible to prove that he's not going to be there. That'll really throw these anti-Christmas people for a loop. You know, if he's there. I mean, we don't know. Do we know whether Nimrod was saved or unsaved? He's a mighty hunter before Jehovah. That doesn't really sound that bad. Okay, maybe he was bad, maybe he was good, but you know what? You can't prove it from the Bible, is what I'm trying to say. You can't even connect him with Semiramis and Tammuz and whatever. The only other mention of Nimrod is in 1 Chronicles 1 verse 10. You don't have to turn there. It says, and Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be mighty upon the earth. So this stuff's not coming from the Bible. Where is it coming from? I'll tell you exactly where it's coming from. Jewish fables. It's coming from the Talmud. It's coming from Josephus, an unbelieving, Christ-rejecting Jew. So basically, all this talk about Nimrod and Semiramis and Tammuz is coming from Jewish stories outside the Bible, Jewish traditions by those who reject Jesus Christ, and the Bible never tells us to avoid Christmas, but it does tell us to avoid Jewish fables. Amen. But avoid Jewish fables. Now look, does the Bible say avoid Christmas? So it's funny how people will attack us for celebrating Christmas, celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ, the one that the Jews reject, the name that they blaspheme. We exalt that name, we lift up that name, we exalt the birth of the Son of God, the Lord Jesus Christ, and then they're going to turn to the enemies of the gospel, and that is what the Bible calls them in Romans 11. It says they are enemies for the gospel's sake, but they are beloved for the Father's sake. So obviously we do love the Jews. We want them saved. We love them. We want them to understand the gospel and be saved. We want to preach the gospel to them, but they are the enemies of the gospel. So why would we go to the enemy and get all their Jewish fables that Jesus and the apostles specifically told us to avoid, stay away from, and they're going to embrace Jewish tradition, Christ-rejecting Judaism tradition, and reject Christmas? You know what? You're straining at an gnat and swallowing a camel. So they go to Jewish fables. Now, listen to this, because I just want to close the sermon with this. Who is behind the movement among Christians attacking Christmas? Where is it coming from? I mean, like I said, when I was a kid, you didn't hear about it. When I was a teenager, you didn't hear about it. When I started this church, you didn't even hear about it. But in the last few years, this is a real big movement. Who's behind it? Well, just Googling, you know, Christmas is pagan, or Nimrod and Christmas, I noticed that basically the people who are pushing this are Zionists and Jews. Okay, like first of all, I went to a website on page 1 of the Google results for just Christmas being pagan. You know, and they had this big article about why Christmas is wrong. And they said this: Christmas celebrates the birth of the Christian God who came to rescue mankind from the curse of the Torah. It's a 24-hour declaration that Judaism is no longer valid. And this website was a pro-Judaism website, you know, giving you all this information about Nimrod and blah, blah, you know, giving you everything against Christmas, how it's all pagan and whatever. And you better know it's a 24-hour declaration that Judaism is no longer valid. I'll celebrate that every day of the year. It's a false religion. If you don't have the Son, you don't have the Father. Whosoever denieth the Son, the same hath not the Father. But he that acknowledgeth the Son hath the Father also. Who is a liar, but he that denieth that Jesus is the Christ, he's Antichrist that denieth the Father and the Son. You're not going to go to an Antichrist that denies the Father and the Son and bring this information to me and expect me to receive it. Okay, and that's where this information seems to be coming from. That was a Jewish website attacking Christmas. Then there was a Christian website on page 1 of the Google results attacking Christmas. But at the end of the article it says, since about 1994, our family has abandoned Christmas and celebrated the Jewish festival of Hanukkah. Okay? And today I know many Christians who are now celebrating Hanukkah. It's a big movement. And it's the same movement that wants to call Jesus Yeshoua, even though the New Testament was written in Greek, not Hebrew. And in Greek, his name is Jesus, like Jesus, like Jesus, okay? It's the same crowd that wants to talk about Yahweh and Yeshua. And they're trying to bring us back under the law, under the Torah, and the Torah observing Christianity. And they're trying to bring us into bondage of the law. Now, go to Galatians 4. This is the last place we'll turn. But I just want to let you know that, you know, if you look at the people who are really propagating these Jewish fables of Nimrod and Semiramis and Tammuz, it is the most Zionistic of Christianity. For example, Chick Publications, you know, which is a dispensationalist, Zionist organization that preaches dispensationalism, that preaches Zionism. And of course, they have, you know, whole comic books and pamphlets about this stuff. And they sell all the books about this stuff that you know, it's pagan. What I'm trying to say is that the Judaism wants to replace, are you listening? Judaism wants to replace our Christian American traditions with Judeo-Christian. And with Judaism. Now, Hanukkah is not even a holiday that God even laid out in the Old Testament. Hanukkah is something that comes from the Apocrypha, something that comes from, you know, the book of the Maccabees, and it's stuff that's not in our Bible as Christians. It's stuff that comes from Jewish traditions or from the Apocrypha. Now, the Bible does lay out Jewish holidays, or not Jewish holidays, excuse me. The Bible does lay out feast days for the children of Israel in the book of Leviticus. But the Bible also teaches that we should not observe those days in the New Testament. Now, most people are going to celebrate something. It's in our nature as human beings, we like to have feasts. We like to have holidays. We like to mark the end of the year and the beginning of a new year. We like to have these punctuations of getting together with family. Times of spiritual reflection, you know, to read the Christmas story, to put a little extra emphasis on the things of God at Christmas or Easter. And so those who are rejecting Christmas today are rejecting it for Hanukkah. They're rejecting it for Jewish holidays. They're saying, well, I don't do Christmas and Easter, but I'm going to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. I'm going to celebrate Purim. I'm going to celebrate Hanukkah. I'm going to celebrate the Passover. I'm going to celebrate... Look, these are things that the book of Galatians warns us that the Judaizers, or those who want to bring us back under the old covenant, will try to bring in. In Galatians chapter 4, verse 4, the Bible says, but when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth His Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. And in verse 3, He said, even so we, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world. So He's talking about being under bondage. But then He talks about in verse 9, but now, after that you've known God, or rather are known of God, how turn ye again to the weak and beggarly elements, whereunto you desire again to be in bondage. So He's saying, look, you used to be in bondage before Christ came. Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. We are not under the law, but under grace. Why do you want to be brought back under the law? And He says in verse 10, on that note, at the end of verse 9, He said, you desire to be in bondage. Verse 10, ye observe days and months and times and years. I'm afraid of you, lest I have bestowed upon you labor in vain. He's afraid of the fact that they're observing these days, months, times, and years that are bringing them back into bondage of the law. That's what the bondage was, according to verse 3 and 4. The bondage was being under the law. If you go to chapter 5, it says in verse 1, stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. Behold, I, Paul, say unto you that if ye be circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing. For I testify again to every man that is circumcised, that he's a debtor to do the whole law. Now look, these Old Testament things that were done away in the New Testament, that are specifically laid out in Colossians 2 and Hebrews 9, as well as in Galatians, the Sabbath days, the holy days, the new moons, the meats and drinks, the divers washings, and the carnal ordinances. Circumcision. These are things that are done away in the New Testament. God tells us not to observe these things. Okay? Now, today we have a Christian movement that wants us to speak Hebrew, which God did not give us the New Testament in Hebrew. It wants us to circumcise our children, even though the New Testament specifically does not teach circumcision. Specifically tells us that being circumcised is to promote the rest of the Old Testament law, and therefore we shouldn't do it. And that being said, I'm circumcised because I was born in a generation where Christians are all circumcised because they fell for this. You know, this creeping in of Jewish customs into Christianity. The Bible teaches that we do not need to be circumcised, observe the Sabbath, speak Hebrew, call God by Hebrew names, observe Hanukkah, something that's never even mentioned in the Bible. But you see, today there's an attack on our culture today of just being Christian, and they want to make us a Jewish roots Hebrew culture. I'm against it. I'm a Gentile. I was born a Gentile. I will die a Gentile. And you know what? It's the New Testament where there is neither Jew or Gentile. I don't have to speak Hebrew. I don't have to be, I'm already circumcised, too late. You know? I'm not going to celebrate Hanukkah with a bunch of Christ-rejecting, unbelieving Jews.